I never thought a random Tuesday afternoon would change everything about how I saw my life, my marriage, and myself. My name is Jennifer Hayes, and I'm 34 years old. Until that day, I thought I had it all figured out. I was wrong. Let me take you back to the beginning, to understand how a simple decision to leave work early would unravel secrets I never imagined existed. I worked as a senior marketing consultant at a downtown firm, the kind of job that sounds impressive at dinner parties but slowly drains your soul with each passing year. My husband, Marcus, was a real estate developer who spent most of his time managing construction projects across the city. We'd been married for 6 years, and honestly, things had become routine. Not bad, just predictable. We lived in a beautiful 3-story brownstone in Brooklyn that Marcus had renovated himself before we got married. It was his pride and joy, and I loved it too. That Tuesday started like any other. I woke up at 6:30, made coffee, checked my emails while Marcus was already gone. He'd mentioned something about an early meeting with contractors at one of his sites. I remembered kissing him goodbye the night before, his mind already somewhere else, probably calculating costs and timelines. The morning at work dragged. I had back-to-back meetings with clients who couldn't make decisions, and by lunchtime I had a pounding headache that wouldn't quit. My colleague Diana noticed me rubbing my temples during our 2 o'clock presentation. Diana said, "Jennifer, you look terrible. Go home. I'll cover the rest of the day." I protested, saying, "I can't just leave. We have the Morrison pitch tomorrow." Diana said, "And you'll be useless if you're sick. Go. I've got this." I was grateful. Diana had always been the kind of friend who saw through my need to appear strong all the time. So I packed up my laptop, told my assistant I'd be working from home, and headed out around 3 in the afternoon. The subway ride home was unusually quiet. I remember staring at my reflection in the train window, noticing the dark circles under my eyes that concealer couldn't quite hide anymore. When had I stopped taking care of myself? When had life become just a series of obligations to check off? I got off at my stop and walked the 4 blocks to our brownstone. The spring air was crisp, and cherry blossoms were starting to bloom on the trees lining our street. I loved our neighborhood. It was the kind of place where people actually knew their neighbors, where kids still played on the sidewalks, where you felt safe. As I approached our house, I noticed a white construction van parked outside. That was odd. Marcus hadn't mentioned any work being done on our house. Maybe it was for the neighbors? But as I got closer, I saw the van had no company logo, no license plate visible from my angle. Something felt off. I unlocked the front door quietly, not sure why I was being cautious. The house was silent except for muffled voices coming from upstairs, from our bedroom. My heart started racing. Marcus wasn't supposed to be home. He'd said he'd be at the site in Queens all day. I stood in the foyer, my hand still on the doorknob, listening. 2 male voices, definitely. They were speaking in low tones, but I could make out fragments. The first voice said, "Make sure it's centered. He wants it perfect." The second voice replied, "This is insane, man. I've done a lot of weird jobs, but this takes the cake." The first voice said, "Just do it. We're getting paid triple for keeping quiet." My mind raced through possibilities. Burglars? But why would burglars be installing something? A surprise from Marcus? But the tension in those voices didn't sound like people planning something nice. I kicked off my heels, leaving them by the door, and crept up the stairs in my stockinged feet. Each step felt like it took forever. Our stairs were old wood, and I knew exactly which ones creaked. I avoided them like I was navigating a minefield. When I reached the 2nd floor, I could hear them more clearly now. They were definitely in our bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see shadows moving inside. The second voice said, "Hand me that level. This needs to be exact." The first voice said, "How long have they been doing this?" The second voice replied, "According to the guy who hired us, about 8 months." Can you believe it? 8 months? Doing what? My hands were shaking now. I pulled out my phone, made sure it was on silent, and opened the camera app. Whatever was happening, I needed evidence. I pushed the door open just a fraction more, just enough to see inside without being seen. What I saw made my blood run cold. 2 men in construction gear were installing a large 2-way mirror on our bedroom wall. But that wasn't the worst part. Behind where our regular mirror had been, there was a small room I'd never known existed. A hidden space built into the wall, barely 5 feet deep but running the length of our bedroom. And inside that space I could see equipment, cameras, recording devices, a chair, empty water bottles, food wrappers. Someone had been watching our bedroom for 8 months. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My vision started to blur. I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself, And that's when one of the workers turned. The first worker said, "Hey, what the—" I didn't wait. I ran. Down the stairs, grabbing my phone, my fingers fumbling to dial 911. I made it to the kitchen before they came thundering down after me. I screamed into the phone saying, "I need police. There are intruders in my house." 2 men. They've installed cameras in my bedroom. The dispatcher's calm voice said, "Ma'am, what's your address?" I gave it, my voice shaking so badly I had to repeat it twice. The first worker appeared in the kitchen doorway. He wasn't threatening exactly, but he looked panicked. He said, "Lady, you don't understand. We're just doing a job. We were hired to—" I cut him off, saying, "Get out of my house. The police are coming." The second worker appeared behind him, saying, "Mike, we need to go. Now." But Mike, the first worker, held up his hands in a placating gesture. Mike said, "Look, we're not the bad guys here. Your husband hired us, Marcus Hayes. He gave us keys, showed us the space, paid us in cash. We're just contractors." My husband? The room spun. That couldn't be right. Marcus wouldn't— Why would Marcus need to spy on our own bedroom? I said, "You're lying." Mike pulled out his phone, showing me text messages. They were from a number I didn't recognize, but the messages detailed everything. Times to come, how to access the hidden room, what to install. And at the bottom of one message, there was a photo. Marcus's face, holding up a copy of today's newspaper, like proof of life. The dispatcher's voice came through my phone saying, "Ma'am, are you still there?" I said, "Yes, I'm here. The men say my husband hired them." The dispatcher said, "Stay on the line. Officers are 2 minutes away." The second worker, whose name I never learned, tugged at Mike's sleeve. The second worker said, "We're out of here. This is way above our pay grade." Mike looked at me with something like pity in his eyes. Mike said, "Look, I don't know what's going on in your marriage, but that room has been there for months. We were just replacing the mirror because the two-way glass had a crack. Whatever your husband's been doing, you need to talk to him. Or better yet, talk to a lawyer." They left through the back door, and I heard their van start up and drive away. I sank down onto the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets, still holding the phone. The dispatcher said, "Ma'am, the officers are pulling up now. Can you let them in?" I made it to the front door on shaky legs. 2 police officers stood on my stoop, a man and a woman, both looking alert and professional. The female officer said, "I'm Officer Rodriguez. This is Officer Chen. You called about intruders?" I let them in, trying to explain what I'd seen, but my words kept tumbling over each other. Finally, I just said, "Follow me. You need to see this." I led them upstairs to the bedroom. The new two-way mirror was installed, looking innocent and normal. But now I knew what was behind it. Officer Chen examined the wall, knocking on it in different places. Officer Chen said, "There's definitely a hollow space here. How do we access it?" I thought about the layout of the house. The hidden room had to connect to something. I went into the hallway and opened what I'd always thought was just a linen closet. But now, looking more carefully, I saw that the back panel was loose. I pulled it, and it swung open like a door. Behind it was the hidden room, and it was worse than I'd glimpsed before. So much worse. The walls were covered with photos, not just of me, but of other women. Women I didn't recognize. There were at least a dozen different women in various states of undress, clearly photographed without their knowledge through two-way mirrors. Dates were written on the backs of some photos. The earliest was from 3 years ago, long before the 8 months those workers had mentioned. Officer Rodriguez pulled on gloves and started carefully examining the space. Officer Rodriguez said, "Mrs. Hayes, I need you to step back. This is now a crime scene. A crime scene. My home was a crime scene. My marriage was a crime scene." Officer Chen was on his radio, calling for detectives and a crime scene unit. I heard him use words like voyeurism, multiple victims, evidence of long-term surveillance. I sat on the floor in the hallway while officers came and went. Someone brought me water. Someone else asked me questions I barely registered. When did I last see my husband? Did I know any of the women in the photos? Had I noticed anything unusual in recent months? That last question made me laugh, a sharp, bitter sound. Unusual? My entire life had apparently been unusual, and I'd been too blind to see it. Detective Sarah Martinez arrived about an hour later. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes that had seen too much. Detective Martinez said, "Mrs. Hayes, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to focus. Where is your husband right now?" I checked my phone. Nothing from Marcus. I called him, and it went straight to voicemail. I said, "He told me he'd be at a construction site in Queens all day. I can give you the address." Detective Martinez said, We'll send officers there. In the meantime, I need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. Is there someone who can come with you? A friend or family member? I called Diana, who arrived within 20 minutes, her face pale with shock when I gave her the basic outline of what had happened. Diana said, "Oh my God, Jennifer. I can't believe. Marcus always seemed so normal." I said, "I know. That's what makes it worse. How did I not know? How did I live with him for 6 years and not see this?" At the police station, I spent 3 hours going through everything. My relationship with Marcus, how we met, when we married, any signs of unusual behavior. Detective Martinez was patient, taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Detective Martinez said, "The women in those photos, we're going to need to identify them. Many of them appear to be women your husband likely met through his real estate business. Clients, maybe colleagues. We're checking now." I said, "He was recording them without their knowledge? In our bedroom?" Detective Martinez said, "It appears that way. The cameras were sophisticated, remotely activated. We found logs showing recordings going back almost 3 years. Mrs. Hayes, your husband is looking at serious felony charges. Multiple counts of unlawful surveillance, voyeurism, potentially distribution if he shared these recordings." I felt numb. This man I'd shared a bed with, shared my life with, was a predator. How many women had he violated? How many had trusted him, maybe in professional settings, and he'd manipulated them into our bedroom? Detective Martinez said, "There's something else you should know. We found evidence that he might have been selling some of this content on the dark web. We're working with cybercrimes now." I ran to the bathroom and threw up. Diana held my hair back, murmuring reassurances that felt hollow. The police found Marcus that evening at a bar in Manhattan, not at any construction site. He didn't resist arrest. According to Detective Martinez, he seemed almost relieved it was over. I didn't see him that night, or for many nights after. I stayed with Diana in her apartment in the city, unable to even think about going back to that house. The media got hold of the story within 48 hours. Real estate developer arrested in multi-victim voyeurism case. My name was kept out of it initially, but in our neighborhood everyone knew. Everyone stared. The first few weeks were a blur of lawyers, police interviews, and victim advocates. I learned that 12 women had been identified so far from the photos and recordings. 12 lives Marcus had violated. Detective Martinez told me most of them were his clients, women looking at properties who he'd somehow convinced to come to our house for various reasons. To see renovation examples, to discuss financing over dinner, to review contracts in a quiet setting. One victim, Patricia, a 30-year-old teacher, reached out to me through her lawyer. She wanted to meet. Against my attorney's advice, I agreed. We met at a coffee shop in neutral territory. Patricia was beautiful, with long dark hair and tired eyes that probably mirrored my own. Patricia said, "I don't blame you. I need you to know that first. You're a victim too." I felt tears welling up, saying I should have known. I lived with him. How did I not see what he was? Patricia reached across the table and took my hand. Patricia said, "Because men like him are good at hiding. I'm a psychologist, Jennifer. I'm trained to read people, and he completely fooled me. He seemed so professional, so respectful. When he invited me to his home to see his renovation work, it seemed perfectly legitimate. His wife lives there, I thought. How dangerous could it be?" I said, "When did he?" Patricia said, "It was about 7 months ago. He said his wife was out of town, showed me around the house, and then suggested we discuss the property details in his bedroom because he had all his materials laid out on the bed. It seemed odd but not threatening. I was in there maybe 20 minutes, trying on a blazer he said his wife was getting rid of, seeing if it fit. He said she was my size. Now I know he was filming me changing. The manipulation was stunning in its calculated cruelty. Patricia and I talked for over 3 hours that first meeting. She told me about the panic attacks she'd been having, how she couldn't be alone in a room without checking for cameras, how she'd stopped dating entirely because trust felt impossible. I said, "I feel the same way. I check every mirror now, every smoke detector, anything that could hide a camera. I can't even stay in hotels without taking them apart first." Patricia said, "My therapist says it might always be like this to some degree. The hypervigilance becomes part of you. But she also says it gets easier with time, that we learn to live with it rather than being controlled by it." I said, "Do you believe that?" Patricia considered the question, then said, "I'm trying to. Some days are better than others. Today is a better day because I'm sitting here with someone who actually understands. My friends try, but they don't get it. They say things like, 'At least he didn't physically assault you,' like what he did was somehow less violating." I nodded, saying I've heard that too. As if being recorded without consent, having your privacy stolen, your body commodified without permission, isn't a real violation. But it is. It absolutely is. Patricia squeezed my hand, saying, "Thank you for meeting with me. I know this must be strange for you too." I said, "It's not strange. It's necessary. I need to know the other women he hurt. I need to understand the full scope of what he did." Over the next few weeks, I met with 5 more victims. Each meeting was emotionally exhausting, but also strangely healing. We formed a support group, meeting every 2 weeks at Patricia's therapy office. Her therapist, Dr. Linda Chen, volunteered to facilitate our meetings. The second victim I met was Keisha, a 28-year-old architect. Marcus had hired her to consult on a commercial renovation project. She was vibrant and outspoken, with natural hair styled in an impressive afro and a take-no-prisoners attitude that I immediately admired. Keisha said during our group session, "I'm not going to lie and say I'm handling this well. I'm angry. I'm so angry I can barely function sometimes. He stole something from me, and I want it back, but I can't get it back. Those recordings exist somewhere, and I'll never know who's seen them." A third victim, Melissa, a 42-year-old divorced mother of 2, started crying. Melissa said, "I keep thinking about my daughters. What if someone they know saw those videos? What if they're friends' parents? I can't even send them to school without worrying that someone recognizes me from that footage." Patricia, in her role as both victim and psychologist, said, "The shame you're feeling, Melissa, that's not yours to carry. Marcus created those recordings. Marcus distributed them. Any shame attached to this situation belongs entirely to him." Melissa wiped her eyes, saying, "I know that intellectually. But emotionally, I feel dirty. Used. Like I did something wrong by trusting him." I spoke up, saying, "I feel the same way. And I was married to him. I slept next to him every night. If anyone should feel stupid for trusting him, it's me. But Patricia's right. We can't carry his shame. We have to find a way to give it back to him." Keisha said, "How do we do that? Seriously, how?" Patricia said, "We testify. We tell our stories. We make sure everyone knows exactly what he did and who he hurt. We don't hide. We don't minimize. We stand up and say, 'This happened to me, and it was wrong, and he needs to be held accountable.'" That meeting changed the trajectory of how I approached my own healing. I'd been hiding, staying at Diana's apartment, avoiding anywhere I might be recognized. But Patricia was right. Hiding felt like accepting shame that wasn't mine. I met with Detective Martinez the next day. I said, "I want to do a press conference. Me and the other victims who are willing. I want people to know this isn't just about hidden cameras and recordings. It's about women whose lives were violated, whose trust was weaponized against them." Detective Martinez looked surprised, saying, "Jennifer, are you sure? Once you go public with your identity, you can't take it back. The media attention will be intense." I said, "I know, but I'm tired of hiding, and more importantly, I think other women need to see that victims don't have to be ashamed. We didn't do anything wrong." We held the press conference 2 weeks later. 7 of the 12 victims agreed to participate. We stood on the courthouse steps, a line of women of different ages, races, and backgrounds, united by Marcus's crimes. Patricia spoke first, her voice steady and clear. Patricia said, "My name is Patricia Valdez, and I'm one of Marcus Hayes' victims. I'm a licensed psychologist, a professional trained in human behavior, and he still managed to deceive me. That's because men like Marcus Hayes are predators. They study their targets. They identify vulnerabilities. They create situations that seem safe. I want every woman watching this to understand something crucial. If this happened to you, it's not because you were naive or stupid. It's because he was calculating and cruel." Keisha spoke next, her anger channeled into powerful advocacy. Keisha said, "Marcus Hayes recorded me without my consent and sold that footage for profit. He turned my body, my privacy, my trust into a commodity. And he did it using his wife's home as the trap. This isn't about a man with a problem. This is about a criminal enterprise built on violating women. I'm here today because I refuse to let him or anyone else make me feel ashamed for being victimized." When it was my turn, my hands were shaking, but my voice was strong. I said, "I'm Jennifer Morrison, formerly Jennifer Hayes. I was married to Marcus for 6 years. I thought I knew him. I was wrong. But my failure to see his true nature doesn't make me responsible for his crimes. I'm here because I want other victims of similar crimes to know they're not alone. Technology-facilitated abuse is growing. Hidden cameras, revenge porn, deepfakes. Predators are using technology to violate people in new ways. We need better laws, better enforcement, and better support for victims. And we need to stop blaming victims for trusting people who present themselves as trustworthy. The press conference made national news. My phone exploded with calls from journalists, advocacy organizations, and other victims sharing their own stories. It was overwhelming, but it also felt like taking back power. Diana called me that night saying, "I just watched the press conference. Jennifer, you were incredible. I'm so proud of you." I said, "I was terrified, but it needed to be done." Diana said, "You know what? I think this is the beginning of something. You're going to help so many people." She was right, though I didn't fully understand it yet. Meeting these women changed something in me. Initially, I'd felt like my life was ending. The embarrassment, the betrayal, the violation of having lived in a house that was essentially a trap for unsuspecting women. But seeing their strength, their determination to see Marcus prosecuted, ignited something I thought I'd lost. I hired one of the best divorce attorneys in New York. Margaret Vance was in her 60s, with silver hair and a reputation for destroying unfaithful husbands in court. Margaret said during our first meeting, "Jennifer, you have grounds for fault divorce, obviously, but more importantly, you have a civil case. Your husband used your shared marital home to commit felonies. He violated your trust, your safety, and your rights. We're going to make sure you get everything." I said, "I don't want his money. It's tainted." Margaret leaned forward, saying, "Then we'll give it to the victims. Set up a fund. But don't let him keep it. Men like him need to understand there are consequences." The criminal trial began 7 months after that Tuesday afternoon. Marcus had pleaded not guilty initially, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the equipment, the testimonies of 12 women. His defense attorney tried to argue that the recordings were for personal use only, that there was no distribution, but the prosecution had found evidence of sales. Hundreds of videos sold on encrypted sites. I attended every day of the trial. Patricia sat beside me, and some days, other victims joined us. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney James Wong, was methodical and fierce. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined from watching legal dramas on television. Oak paneling, uncomfortable wooden benches, fluorescent lighting that gave everyone a sickly pallor. But what made it feel surreal was seeing Marcus sitting at the defense table in a suit, looking like the professional man I'd married rather than the predator he'd become. During his opening statement, Ada Wong said, "Marcus Hayes is not a naive man who made a mistake. He is a predator who used his position of trust, his profession, and even his marriage as tools to violate women systematically over years. He built a room in his home for the explicit purpose of spying on women without their consent. He recorded their most private moments. He sold those recordings for profit. This is not a case about a marriage gone wrong. This is a case about a serial predator who needs to be held accountable." The defense attorney, a slick man named Gerald Brennan, who specialized in defending white-collar criminals, had a different strategy. Brennan said in his opening, "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a man with a serious psychological disorder. Marcus Hayes suffers from voyeuristic tendencies, yes, but he's not the calculating monster the prosecution wants you to believe. He's a man who needs treatment, not decades in prison. The recordings were never meant to be seen by anyone else. The alleged sales were the work of hackers who breached his personal servers. My client is a victim of cybercrime himself." I almost laughed out loud at that. Marcus as victim. It was absurd. The first week of trial focused on establishing the facts. Police testified about finding the hidden room, the equipment, the recordings. Forensic experts walked the jury through the technical aspects of the cameras, the remote activation, the file storage and organization. Everything was meticulously documented, deliberately created, systematically maintained. The second week brought the cybercrime experts. A specialist from the FBI's cyber division testified about finding Marcus's dark web accounts, the cryptocurrency transactions, the encrypted communications with buyers. They'd traced over $80,000 in Bitcoin payments to accounts Marcus controlled. The defense tried to argue the accounts could have been hacked, but the FBI agent shut that down quickly. The FBI agent said the accounts were accessed from Mr. Hayes' personal laptop, his work computer, and his phone. The IP addresses matched his home and office locations. The timing of uploads corresponded with when victims were recorded. There's no evidence of hacking whatsoever. This was a deliberate, ongoing criminal enterprise. When cross-examined, the defense got nowhere. Brennan asked, "But isn't it possible, Agent, that a sophisticated hacker could have made it appear that Mr. Hayes was the one accessing these accounts? The FBI agent said, theoretically possible? In the way that it's theoretically possible I could spontaneously develop the ability to fly? Sure. Probable or supported by any evidence? Absolutely not. Even the judge smirked at that. The third week brought the victims. This was what I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. One by one, 12 women took the stand and told their stories. Patricia went first. She was composed, professional, devastating. Ada Wong asked, Dr. Valdez, can you describe your first meeting with the defendant? Patricia said, he contacted my private practice claiming he was interested in purchasing a brownstone and wanted to consult with someone about the psychological aspects of home design. It seemed like an unusual request, but I occasionally work with architects and interior designers on therapeutic environments. We met at a coffee shop first. He was charming, professional, asked intelligent questions about how space affects mood and behavior. Ada Wong said, when did he invite you to his home? Patricia said, during our third meeting. He said he'd love my professional opinion on his own renovation project. He mentioned his wife several times, showed me photos of them together. It seemed completely legitimate. When I arrived, he gave me a tour. The bedroom was the last stop. He said he was particularly proud of the work he'd done there, the way the light came in, the calming color palette. He asked if I thought it created a good therapeutic environment. Ada Wong said, what happened then? Patricia said, he pulled out a blazer and said his wife had purchased it, but it didn't fit her. Asked if I'd like to try it on since we appeared to be similar sizes. He left the room, giving me privacy. I tried it on in front of the mirror. I was in there perhaps 15 minutes trying on the blazer and a scarf he also offered. I felt completely safe because he'd left the room, because his wife's belongings were everywhere, because everything about the situation seemed innocent. I had no idea he was watching me the entire time, recording me. On cross-examination, Brennan tried to imply Patricia should have known better. Brennan said, Dr. Valdez, as a psychologist, don't you have training in recognizing manipulative behavior? Patricia looked at him with steel in her eyes, saying, I do. I also have training in normal social interactions. When someone invites you to their home, mentions their spouse, offers you clothing in a context that seems generous and appropriate, that's not typically considered manipulative. It's considered polite. Mr. Hayes was counting on that. He was counting on the fact that most people operate from a place of basic trust in social situations. Brennan tried again, saying, but you must admit it was unusual to try on clothes at a client's home. Patricia said, I wasn't there as his psychologist. I was consulting on design. And yes, in hindsight, everything seems like a red flag. That's how hindsight works. But in the moment, with all the context he'd carefully constructed, it seemed harmless. That's what predators do, counselor. They create context where their behavior seems normal until you realize, too late, that nothing about it was normal. The jury was clearly moved. 2 jurors were crying. Keisha's testimony was different. She was angry, and she didn't hide it. Ada Wong asked, Miss Carter, how did you meet the defendant? Keisha said, he hired my architectural firm to consult on a commercial renovation. I met with him 3 times at various properties. He was professional, paid on time, seemed like a good client. Then he invited me to see his personal renovation work. Said it might inspire ideas for the commercial project. I went during my lunch break. Big mistake. Ada Wong said, what happened at his residence? Keisha said, he showed me around, then brought me to the bedroom. Said the built-in closet system was something he was considering for the commercial space and wanted my opinion on the design. I was examining the closet structure, taking photos for reference. He suggested I step inside to get a better sense of the dimensions. I did. I was professional, doing my job. He was filming me from outside through that damn 2-way mirror. I found out later he edited the footage to make it look like I was snooping through his wife's clothes, like I was some kind of creep. Then he sold that edited footage. The anger in her voice was palpable. On cross-examination, Brennan made the mistake of pushing too hard. Brennan said, isn't it true, Miss Carter, that you agreed to return to Mr. Hayes' home alone on 3 separate occasions? Keisha said, I returned for professional reasons. He was a client. Are you suggesting that conducting business with a client means I consented to being secretly recorded? Because if so, you're victim blaming, and you should be ashamed of yourself. The judge had to call for order as the gallery erupted in murmurs. Each victim's testimony built on the previous one, creating an undeniable pattern. Marcus had targeted successful, professional women. He'd used his marriage as a shield, his home as a trap, and his profession as bait. He'd manipulated situations to seem innocuous, then recorded and profited from the violations. The defense tried to paint Marcus as a man with a psychological disorder, someone who needed treatment, not punishment. His attorney called an expert who talked about voyeuristic disorder and impulse control. But on cross-examination, Ada Wong demolished that argument. Ada Wong asked the defense expert, "Doctor, isn't it true that someone with genuine voyeuristic disorder typically doesn't have the capacity to plan and construct an elaborate hidden room with remote cameras and encrypted sales platforms?" The expert hesitated, then said, "Well, there can be varying degrees of sophistication." Ada Wong pressed, "And isn't it true that the presence of financial motivation, as evidenced by Mr. Hayes selling these recordings, actually excludes a diagnosis of pure voyeuristic disorder? That the DSM requires the behavior to be primarily driven by sexual gratification, not profit?" The expert admitted that was correct. When it was time for victim impact statements, I watched 12 women stand up and tell their stories. Patricia went first. Patricia said, standing at the podium with remarkable composure, "I trusted Marcus Hayes because he presented himself as a family man, a professional, someone safe. He used his wife's presence in his life as a shield. When I learned what he'd done, I felt violated in a way I can't fully describe. I've been a therapist for 8 years, helping others recover from trauma, and now I'm the one in therapy, struggling with trust, struggling with intimacy. I see cameras everywhere now. I can't even use a dressing room without having a panic attack. Marcus Hayes didn't just record me without consent. He stole my sense of safety in the world. One by one, they spoke. Each story was heartbreaking. Each woman was strong and broken and determined all at once. When it was my turn, I wasn't required to give a statement, but I wanted to. I needed Marcus to hear what he'd done to my life, too. I stood at the podium, looking directly at him for the first time since the trial began. He looked smaller than I remembered, defeated. I felt nothing for him. Not anger, not sadness, just nothing. I said, "Marcus, we were married for 6 years. I thought I knew you. I thought we had a partnership, a life together. I defended you to my friends when they said you worked too much. I believed you when you said you were at construction sites. I trusted you with everything I had. And the whole time, you were using our home, our bedroom, as a hunting ground. You made me complicit in your crimes without my knowledge. Every woman who walked into our house, I might have greeted her. I might have offered her tea. And then you filmed her. You violated her. And in doing so, you violated me too. I have to live with the knowledge that my home was used to hurt people, that my marriage was a lie, that the man I loved never existed. You don't get to steal any more of my life, Marcus. I'm taking it back. I'm rebuilding. And I hope every day of your sentence, you think about the women whose lives you tried to destroy and how we survived you." I walked back to my seat, Diana squeezing my hand. I didn't cry. I was done crying over Marcus Hayes. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. 14 counts of unlawful surveillance, 12 counts of voyeurism, 8 counts of distribution of intimate images without consent, and 3 counts of cybercrime related to the dark web sales. At sentencing, the judge was unsparing. Judge Morrison said, "Mr. Hayes, in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a calculated, long-term violation of multiple victims. You used your profession, your marriage, and your apparent respectability as weapons against women. You have shown no genuine remorse, only regret at being caught. The law allows me to sentence you to up to 25 years in prison. I am sentencing you to 22 years, with no possibility of parole before 18 years served. I hope you use that time to reflect on the harm you've caused." Marcus was led away. I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The civil suits followed. Margaret was brilliant, ruthless in her efficiency. The house was sold, and every penny went into a victims' compensation fund we established. Marcus's other assets, including several investment properties, were liquidated. In total, we recovered almost $4 million for the 12 victims and for my own damages. But money doesn't fix what was broken. It doesn't restore trust or erase nightmares or make the world feel safe again. The real work was rebuilding myself. I started therapy with a trauma specialist, Dr. Helen Okafor, who had worked with victims of intimate partner abuse for decades. Her office was in a quiet brownstone in the West Village. Nothing like my old home, but enough to make my palms sweat the first time I climbed those front steps. Dr. Okafor was a tall woman with warm brown eyes and silver locks pulled back in an elegant twist. She had a calm presence that immediately put me at ease, even though I'd arrived at our first session convinced I'd fall apart the moment I started talking. In one of our early sessions, Dr. Okafor asked me, "What do you feel you lost in all of this?" I thought for a long time before answering, saying, "I lost my ability to trust my own judgment. If I couldn't see what Marcus was, how can I trust myself to see anything clearly?" Dr. Okafor said, "Jennifer, you're assuming you should have seen something that Marcus spent years deliberately hiding. He was living a double life, carefully constructed. That's not a failure of your judgment. That's his success at deception." I said, "But there must have been signs, red flags I missed." Dr. Okafor leaned forward saying, "Perhaps, or perhaps not. Either way, his choices are not your responsibility. Your work now is not to blame yourself for his actions, but to learn how to trust yourself again. To rebuild your sense of safety and judgment without the weight of his crimes on your shoulders." That became my focus. Rebuilding trust, in myself, in others, in the world. The therapy sessions became a lifeline. Twice a week, I'd sit in Dr. Okafor's peaceful office, surrounded by plants and soft lighting, and slowly unpick the tangled mess of my emotions. Some days I cried so hard I couldn't speak. Other days I was numb, going through the motions of healing without feeling anything at all. Dr. Okafor introduced me to trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, helping me understand how my brain was processing what had happened. She explained that my hypervigilance, my trust issues, my nightmares were all normal responses to abnormal circumstances. In one particularly difficult session, about 3 months into therapy, I broke down completely. I said, "I keep replaying our entire marriage in my head. Every conversation, every moment. Was any of it real? Did he ever actually love me, or was I just cover for his crimes?" Dr. Okafor handed me tissues, her voice steady, saying, "Those are questions you may never have definitive answers to, and I know that's incredibly painful. But I want you to consider something. Your feelings were real. Your love was real. Even if Marcus was incapable of reciprocating authentically, that doesn't make your emotions less valid or your experience less meaningful." I said, "How do I move forward not knowing?" Dr. Okafor said, "You accept the uncertainty. You grieve what you thought you had. And you recognize that your capacity for love and trust speaks to your strength, not your weakness. He's the one who was broken, Jennifer, not you." We worked on grounding techniques for when I felt overwhelmed. Box breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, naming 5 things I could see, 4 I could touch, 3 I could hear, 2 I could smell, 1 I could taste. These simple tools became anchors when panic threatened to pull me under. Dr. Okafor also helped me process the guilt I felt about the other victims. I'd lie awake at night thinking about how my home had been used to hurt them, how I'd unknowingly been part of Marcus's cover story. I told her during one session, "Every time I meet one of the other women, I want to apologize. I feel like I should have protected them somehow." Dr. Okafor said, "You couldn't have protected them from something you didn't know existed. Guilt implies you had knowledge and chose not to act. You had neither knowledge nor choice. What you're feeling is misplaced responsibility." She suggested I write letters to the victims, not to send but to process my feelings. I filled notebooks with apologies, with rage, with sorrow. The act of writing helped me separate my feelings from the facts. The fact was Marcus committed these crimes. My feelings of guilt didn't change that truth. Around 6 months into therapy, we started working on what Dr. Okafor called post-traumatic growth, the idea that trauma doesn't just damage us, it can also transform us in meaningful ways if we're willing to do the work. Dr. Okafor said, "I'm not saying you should be grateful for what happened, but I am saying you have an opportunity to decide who you want to be in the aftermath. The trauma happened to you. What you do next is your choice." That perspective shifted something in me. I'd been so focused on what was done to me that I hadn't considered what I could do with it. That's when I first started thinking about victim advocacy as more than just my own healing journey, but as a potential career. I left my marketing job 6 months after the trial. I'd been going through the motions, but my heart wasn't in it. I needed something that felt meaningful after everything that had happened. I went back to school to become a victim advocate. If my experience could help others navigate the legal and emotional aftermath of similar crimes, then maybe something good could come from this nightmare. The program was intense, 2 years of coursework and supervised practice. The classes covered everything from crisis intervention to understanding the criminal justice system, from trauma psychology to practical skills like safety planning and resource navigation. My cohort was small, just 15 people, but they came from diverse backgrounds. Former law enforcement officers, social workers, survivors like me who'd found purpose in their pain. We bonded quickly over the heavy material and shared commitment to the work. One of my instructors, Professor Maria Santos, had worked as a victim advocate for over 20 years. She was tough, no nonsense, and had seen everything. During one lecture, Professor Santos said, "The most important thing you need to understand about this work is that you cannot save anyone. Your job is not to rescue victims. Your job is to walk beside them while they save themselves. You provide information, resources, support, but they make the decisions. Their autonomy was violated. Your role is to help them reclaim it, not to take it from them again by being a well-meaning rescuer." That lesson stayed with me throughout my training. During my practicum placement at a domestic violence shelter, I worked with women who'd experienced intimate partner violence. Each story was unique, each woman's path to leaving different, but the common thread was the need for someone to believe them, support them, and respect their choices. I met Tanya during my practicum. She was 26, with a 3-year-old daughter, fleeing an abusive husband who'd controlled every aspect of her life for 5 years. She was terrified, overwhelmed, and kept second-guessing her decision to leave. Tanya said during one of our sessions, "Maybe I'm overreacting. He never hit me that hard, and he's a good father most of the time. Maybe I should go back and try harder." I wanted to shake her and tell her no, that she deserved better, that her husband was abusive and dangerous. But Professor Santos's words echoed in my head. I said, "What you're feeling is completely normal. Leaving is terrifying, and doubt is part of the process. What I can tell you is this. You know your situation better than anyone else. If you felt unsafe enough to leave, those feelings are valid. But whether you stay or go, whether you go back or move forward, that's your choice. I'm here to support whatever decision you make and to help you understand your options." Tanya cried, saying, "Everyone else just tells me what to do. Leave him, don't go back, press charges. But you're the first person who said it's my choice." I said, "Because it is. You deserve to have choices. You deserve to have your autonomy respected." 3 weeks later, Tanya told me she'd decided not to go back. She'd secured a restraining order, enrolled in a job training program, and was working with legal aid to file for divorce. Watching her reclaim her power was one of the most profound experiences of my training. I worked with dozens of clients during my 2 years in the program. Each person taught me something new about resilience, about survival, about the complexity of trauma and healing. Some were ready to immediately take action. Others needed months or years before they could move forward. My job was to meet them wherever they were and provide steady support. I worked with domestic violence survivors, sexual assault victims, stalking victims, and increasingly, victims of technology-facilitated abuse like what Marcus had done to me and the other women. The cases involving hidden cameras, revenge porn, deepfakes, and other digital violations were growing rapidly, but resources and legal frameworks weren't keeping pace. That's when Patricia and I started seriously discussing creating a specialized organization. We met for coffee one Saturday morning, about 18 months into my training program. Patricia had been working with a women's center, but felt frustrated by the lack of specialized support for technology-based crimes. Patricia said, "I had 3 clients this month who'd found hidden cameras in their homes. Boyfriends, husbands, roommates who'd been recording them. The police barely know how to handle these cases. The existing victim services don't have specialized knowledge. These women are falling through the cracks." I said, "I'm seeing the same thing in my practicum. The digital aspect makes everything more complicated. The recordings can be distributed globally in seconds. The evidence is technical and requires expertise to preserve. The psychological impact is unique because victims know footage of them exists out there forever but don't know who's seen it or where it is." Patricia said, "What if we started something? A specialized organization just for technology-facilitated abuse. We could provide victim advocacy, legal support, technical resources, therapy referrals. Everything in one place." I said, "I graduate in 6 months. Let's do it." We spent those 6 months planning. Patricia handled the therapeutic and clinical side. I focused on the legal and advocacy components. We recruited a lawyer, Amanda Kirkland, who'd worked on several high-profile revenge porn cases and was passionate about victims' rights. We found a tech specialist, David Chen, who'd done digital forensics for law enforcement and wanted to help victims preserve evidence and secure their devices. We incorporated as a nonprofit, filed for 501c3 status, and named the organization Reclaim Your Space. The name came from one of our early planning sessions when Patricia said, "These crimes steal your sense of safety in your own spaces. We want to help people reclaim that. We launched with minimal funding, mostly donations from the Victims' Compensation Fund, from Marcus's case, and a small grant from a women's foundation. We rented office space in a shared nonprofit building, furnished it with donated furniture, and opened our doors. The first month, we had 2 clients. The second month, 8. By month 6, we had a waiting list. Our model was comprehensive. When a victim contacted us, they were paired with an advocate who helped them navigate every step. We helped them report to police and provided technical experts who could explain evidence in ways law enforcement understood. We connected them with attorneys who specialized in these cases. We had a network of therapists trained in trauma from digital violations. We helped them secure their devices, sweep their homes for hidden cameras, and lock down their online presence. Amanda said during one of our early team meetings, "You know what makes this organization different? You two aren't just advocates. You're survivors. When clients come in and see Patricia, see Jennifer, they know you understand. They know you're not just professionals doing a job. You've been where they are." She was right. That first-hand understanding changed how we connected with clients. When a woman came in crying, saying she felt stupid for not knowing her partner had installed cameras, I could look her in the eye and say, "I was married to my abuser for 6 years and had no idea." It's not about being stupid. It's about trusting someone who weaponized that trust. Patricia and I also started training other victim advocates, law enforcement, and prosecutors on technology-facilitated abuse. We developed a curriculum, created resource guides, and traveled to different jurisdictions teaching what we'd learned. During one training session in Philadelphia, a police sergeant raised his hand. The sergeant said, "How do we get victims to actually report these crimes? Most of the ones I've encountered are too embarrassed or afraid." Patricia answered, saying, "You create an environment where they feel believed and supported, not judged. That means training your officers not to ask questions like, 'Why did you trust him?' or 'Why were you in that situation?' The focus needs to be on the perpetrator's criminal behavior, not the victim's actions. And you need to move quickly. Evidence disappears fast in these cases. Every hour you delay, recordings get deleted, devices get wiped, suspects flee." The sergeant nodded, taking notes. I added, "Also, you need to understand the psychological component. These victims often experience the same trauma symptoms as sexual assault survivors: shame, self-blame, fear, hypervigilance. But society doesn't always recognize digital violations as serious crimes. Victims hear things like, 'At least he didn't hurt you physically,' which minimizes their trauma. Your response as law enforcement can either validate their experience or add to their victimization. These training sessions were exhausting but necessary. We were changing minds, one officer, one prosecutor, one advocate at a time. Patricia and I stayed in touch. She became one of my closest friends, which might seem strange to outsiders, but we understood each other in ways no one else could. We'd both been violated by the same man. Both had to rebuild our lives from scratch. One evening, about 2 years after the trial, Patricia and I were having dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the West Village. Patricia said, "I started dating someone, a guy I met at a conference." I smiled, genuinely happy for her, saying, "That's wonderful." "How do you feel about it?" Patricia said, terrified, excited, both at once. "We're taking it slow. He knows about what happened and he's patient. But Jennifer, I never thought I'd get here. I never thought I'd be able to trust someone enough to even try." I reached across the table and clinked my wine glass against hers, saying, "You're amazing. You know that, right?" Patricia said, "We're amazing. All of us who survived him, we didn't let him win. That became our mantra. He didn't win." I sold most of the furniture from the brownstone before it was sold. I kept nothing that reminded me of Marcus. I moved into a small apartment in the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows and none of the dark corners that had come to define my old life. I painted the walls bright colors, filled it with plants, made it a space that was entirely mine. I dated occasionally, though trust didn't come easily. I was upfront about my history, which scared some men off. The ones who stayed were worth knowing. I met Ryan at a victim advocacy training seminar 3 years after the trial. He was a police officer who'd specialized in domestic violence cases, and he was taking the course to better support victims. We started as friends, grabbing coffee after sessions, talking about cases and challenges. One day, after a particularly difficult class about long-term psychological impacts of intimate partner violence, Ryan walked me home. Ryan said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "You don't have to answer." I said, "Go ahead." Ryan said, "How do you do it? How do you work with victims every day given what you went through?" Doesn't it bring it all back? I stopped walking and really thought about his question. I said, it does bring it back sometimes, but every person I help, every victim I guide through the legal system or just sit with while they cry, it feels like I'm fighting back against what Marcus did. He wanted to make us powerless. This work makes me powerful. It gives meaning to the pain. Ryan looked at me with such respect and admiration that I felt something flutter in my chest, something I hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe, or possibility. We started dating slowly, carefully. Ryan was patient with my trust issues, with the moments when I'd pull away or need space. He never pushed, never made me feel broken or damaged. 6 months into our relationship, I had a nightmare. I woke up screaming, disoriented, convinced I was back in that brownstone bedroom. Ryan held me, talking in a low, calm voice until I remembered where I was, who I was with, that I was safe. After I calmed down, I said, I'm sorry. This happens sometimes. The therapist says it might always happen sometimes. Ryan said, don't apologize. You survived something terrible. Your brain is just trying to process that. I'm not going anywhere. I said, why? Why would you want to be with someone as broken as me? Ryan took my face in his hands, saying, Jennifer, you're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference. Broken things can't function. You're out there every day helping people, building a new life, growing. That's not broken. That's incredibly strong. I cried then, not from sadness, but from relief. From being seen not as a victim, but as a survivor, as someone whole, even with scars. The 5-year anniversary of that Tuesday afternoon came and went. I marked it quietly, allowing myself to remember and then letting it go. Marcus was in prison. The victims had their compensation. I had my new life, my work, my relationship with Ryan. I'd started speaking at conferences about victim advocacy, about navigating the legal system after intimate crimes, about rebuilding trust. Patricia often spoke with me, sharing the psychological perspective. At one conference in Boston, a young woman approached me afterward. She couldn't have been more than 25, with frightened eyes and a story she'd been holding inside. She said, my boyfriend installed cameras in our apartment without telling me. I found them last week. I don't know what to do. My family says I'm overreacting, that he probably was just worried about break-ins, but I know he was watching me. I feel so violated, but everyone says I should just move on. I sat with her in the conference center lobby for 2 hours. I gave her resources, contact information for attorneys and victim advocates in her area. I listened while she cried. I told her that her feelings were valid, that what he'd done was illegal, that she deserved justice. Before she left, she hugged me and said, thank you for believing me. Thank you for understanding. That's what this work meant to me, being the person I needed when my world fell apart. Patricia and I expanded our advocacy work. We started a nonprofit organization called Reclaim Your Space, focused on supporting victims of voyeurism and technology-facilitated abuse. It was a growing problem as cameras became smaller and easier to hide, as technology outpaced laws. We worked with legislators to strengthen privacy laws, with law enforcement to better train officers on these crimes, with communities to raise awareness. We provided legal support, counseling referrals, and a community for survivors. Our first annual fundraiser was held in a beautiful loft space downtown. Over 200 people attended, including several of Marcus's other victims. We'd all stayed connected, a sisterhood forged in the worst circumstances, but grown into something powerful. Patricia gave the opening speech, saying, 5 years ago, a man tried to reduce us to objects for his gratification and profit. He filmed us without consent, violated our privacy, and thought he'd gotten away with it. But here we are, not just surviving, but thriving. We've turned our pain into purpose, our victimization into advocacy. We're helping others, changing laws, making the world safer. He didn't win. We did. The room erupted in applause. I looked around at these incredible women, at the community we'd built, and felt something I never thought I'd feel again. After that day, I came home early. Pride. Not despite what happened, but because of how we'd responded to it. Ryan proposed to me at that fundraiser, getting down on one knee in front of everyone. I said yes without hesitation, no longer afraid of trust, no longer defined by Marcus's betrayal. I'd learned that one person's evil didn't mean everyone was evil. That being hurt didn't mean I had to live in fear. We married in a small ceremony surrounded by the people who'd helped me rebuild my life. Diana was my maid of honor. Patricia gave a reading. Detective Martinez attended, having become a friend over the years. During the ceremony, I wrote my own vows. I said, looking at Ryan. I'm not going to pretend that what I've been through didn't change me. It did. But those changes made me stronger, more compassionate, more aware of how precious trust and safety are. You've been patient with my healing, supportive of my work, and loving through all the difficult moments. You've never made me feel like I was too much or not enough. You see me as whole, as powerful, as worthy of love. That's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. I promise to honor your trust, to build a life with you based on honesty and respect, and to never take for granted the safety you provide. I love you not because you rescued me, but because you walked beside me while I rescued myself. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. 7 years after finding those construction workers in my bedroom, I'm living a life I never could have imagined on that terrible Tuesday. I work every day helping others reclaim their power. I'm married to someone who respects and cherishes me. I've built friendships forged in fire that will last forever. Marcus is in prison, where he'll stay for more than a decade longer. I don't think about him often anymore. When I do, it's not with the crushing weight of betrayal, but with a distant acknowledgement that he was a chapter in my life, not the whole story. The organization Patricia and I built has helped over 300 victims in 7 years. We've trained hundreds of law enforcement officers. We've gotten 5 new laws passed strengthening privacy protections. We've created a model that other cities are adopting. Last month, I received a letter from one of the women we'd helped. Her ex-boyfriend had been using a hidden camera to record her in her own home. She'd found it, contacted us, and we'd guided her through the legal process. He was convicted and sentenced to 6 years in prison. She wrote, "I wanted you to know that your story gave me courage. When I found that camera, my first instinct was to hide, to pretend it didn't happen, to avoid the embarrassment of everyone knowing. But then I remembered reading about you and the other women who came forward, how you didn't let shame silence you, how you fought back. So I fought back too. And I won. Thank you for showing me that victims don't have to stay victims. We can become survivors, advocates, warriors." I keep that letter on my desk. On days when the work is hard, when I hear another heartbreaking story, when I feel the weight of how much needs to change, I read it and remember why this matters. Patricia and I were having lunch last week when she asked me something I'd been thinking about myself. Patricia said, "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you hadn't come home early that day? If you'd never found out?" I considered it, saying, "Sometimes. I think about how many more women Marcus could have hurt, how the violations would have continued. In a strange way, coming home early that day saved people. It ended his ability to hurt others." Patricia said, "It saved you too. You were living a lie. The marriage wasn't real. Finding out was devastating, but at least you got to build something real afterward." She was right. The life I'd had before that Tuesday had been comfortable, but hollow. I'd been going through motions, following a script, not really living. The trauma of discovery had shattered that comfortable numbness and forced me to rebuild from nothing. And what I built was better, more authentic, more purposeful. Ryan and I bought a house last year, in a completely different neighborhood from the old brownstone. It's filled with light and love and none of the shadows of my past. We're talking about starting a family, which terrifies and excites me in equal measure. The thought of bringing a child into the world after what I experienced raises questions about safety and trust, but it also feels like the ultimate act of defiance. Marcus tried to make me afraid of life. Having a family feels like choosing hope over fear. Last night, Ryan found me in our home office, working late on a grant proposal for the nonprofit. Ryan said, "It's past midnight. Come to bed." I said, "Just finishing this section. This grant could fund 3 new victim advocates." Ryan came up behind me, reading over my shoulder, saying, "You're going to change the world, you know that?" I turned to look at him, saying, "I'm trying to change it for the people who need it. One victim at a time, one law at a time, one story at a time." He kissed the top of my head, saying, "I'm proud of you. Every single day, I'm proud of you." As I saved the document and shut down my computer, I thought about the journey from that Tuesday afternoon to this moment. The terror of discovery, the pain of betrayal, the long road of healing, and the eventual triumph of building something meaningful from the ruins. I'd learned that strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about gathering the pieces and creating something new. That vulnerability isn't weakness. That trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, maybe even stronger than before because it's chosen consciously, not given naively. I used to think my life was defined by what Marcus did to me, but I've learned that my life is defined by what I did after, how I chose to respond, how I refused to let his actions determine my worth, How I took the worst experience of my life and used it to help others. The women in those photos, we all became more than victims. We became a force. We became advocates, activists, survivors who refused to be silenced. Marcus thought he had power over us, but he was wrong. The power was always ours. We just had to reclaim it. That Tuesday afternoon when I came home early changed everything. It ended my old life and forced me to build a new one. And while I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone, I also wouldn't trade the person I've become because of it. I'm stronger now, more compassionate, more purposeful. I know what I'm capable of surviving. I know how to help others survive too. Tomorrow I have 3 client meetings, a call with a legislator about a new privacy bill, and a training session for police officers. The work never stops, and I'm grateful for that. Each person I help, each system I change, each law we pass feels like another victory. Marcus is in a cell. I'm building a movement. He tried to trap us. We freed ourselves, and now we're freeing others. That's the real ending to this story. Not the discovery, not the trial, not even the healing. The real ending is that we took the worst thing that ever happened to us and transformed it into something that makes the world better. We didn't just survive Marcus Hayes. We transcended him. And that's the kind of justice that lasts long after prison sentences are served. I'm Jennifer Hayes, though I've gone back to my maiden name, Jennifer Morrison. I'm a survivor, an advocate, a wife, and hopefully soon a mother. I'm someone who looked evil in the face and didn't blink. I'm someone who fell apart and put herself back together. I'm someone who refuses to let trauma define her future. And every day I wake up and choose to keep fighting for the people who need it. Because that Tuesday afternoon taught me something crucial. Terrible things happen, but they don't have to be the end of the story. Sometimes, they're just the beginning of something better. That's the power we all have, even when we feel powerless. The power to decide what comes next. The power to write our own endings. The power to turn pain into purpose. Marcus took a lot from me. My sense of safety, my marriage, my trust. But he couldn't take my ability to choose who I wanted to become after. That was always mine. And I chose to become someone who fights back, who helps others, who refuses to be defined by what was done to me. 7 years later, I can finally say with complete honesty that I'm glad I came home early that Tuesday. Not because of what I found, but because of who I became in response to it. The journey from victim to survivor to advocate has been the hardest thing I've ever done. It's also been the most meaningful. And it's not over. There are more victims to help, more laws to change, more work to do. But I'm ready for it. We're all ready for it. Because we learned something that Marcus never understood. When you try to break strong people, sometimes you just make them stronger. That's my story. That's our story. And it's far from over.